Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. It's my great pleasure today to welcome Dr. Simcha Chesner to our program. Dr. Chesner made Aliyah more than 30 years ago and has been working in Israel in his field of training, obviously, as a psychologist, but even more specifically with children with ADHD, children with other learning challenges as well. He was the founder and chief psychologist of a schools in Israel that are known as Bnei Chayil, both a residential and a commuter school. He founded and was the executive director of the Matarah Jewish Therapeutic Boarding School for teenagers, and currently is the executive director of the Israel Academy of Social and Emotional Learning. And what brought Dr. Chesner to my attention was a recent book that he published called Kosher ADHD. We all know the challenges that are out there, and it's going to be a lot of fun and informative. Also speaking with Dr. Chesner to hear his perspective. So thank you so very much for joining me today.
Oh, it's great. Great that I can join you overseas. As I said, I'm a few minutes outside of Gaza now, which is probably it's a lot warmer than it is in Chicago.
A little bit more exciting, let's say.
Yeah.
Let's just start right with the topic. Why would you call a book Kosher ADHD? Are you giving a hechsher to it, or is it talking about something else?
Well, right. I look, the title expresses a phenomenon which I know exists. I know it exists because I've worked with it within the past 30 years, and that is that if you are a religious family, if you're trying to be Torah observant, and it means, we have things like Shabbos and learning Torah and davening, and all of these things are incredible challenges for the ADHD child. So many kids with ADHD who grow up in religious homes, and there's a doctoral study just came out last year from Bar-Ilan University that shows kids who grow up in religious homes, their chances of remaining in any way connected with any kind of religious institution after they get 18 years old, become 18, is very, very slim. ADHD kids get hit over the head a lot, and as a result, they tend to be high at risk to leave the Jewish tradition and the Jewish people.
So is it the ADHD which causes them to leave, or is it because they weren't educated properly, taking into account that they had ADHD?
Well, I think, that it's really important to understand that ADHD means both of those things. It's not only a biological fact. It's not something like, God forbid, a serious disease that a person is going to die from. I mean, you could live, ad mea esrim till 120. You can live fantastically with ADHD. Okay, but what's the problem? ADHD is what in psycholingo we call it a biosocial disorder. And what this means is that on one hand, you have a basic biological predisposition. Some people are very calm, some people are less calm, some people are jumping around, are always moving, and other people can sit still for hours. But how that biological disposition expresses itself is dependent upon the society that you live in. And unfortunately, in Torah society today, we are very it's an inhospitable environment if you happen to have an ADHD temperament. The rabbis don't like, and I know you're a rabbi of a synagogue, so I don't have a very important synagogue in Chicago. I don't want to say anything that you're gonna get angry at me with, but rabbis don't like when in the middle of the sermon there's one kid that's bouncing around or hopping around or running up and down the aisle. I mean, that doesn't go over well. Sitting at a Shabbos table for the long meal, these kids are often, it's like a torture chamber for them, learning Gemara at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, in the evening Seder. I mean, it's very hard. Long classes, the dual curriculum, all of the things that are part and parcel of a Torah observant Jew's life. If you have ADHD, these things become really, really up in front. And unless both parents and educators and neighbors and grandparents and adults themselves can know how to work with these things and how we can more mindfully accept them, we are unfortunately losing, hundreds of thousands of Jews are just leaving because they cannot tolerate, it's torture for them to be within the Jewish environment.
So what is the solution? What is the secret to be able to keep them? Is it medication? Is it just being very patient? Is it a combination?
Okay. Well, right. It's a combination of a lot of things. One, and what I really focus on in the book that I co-authored together with Dr. Sarah Markowitz, we co-authored this book and we focus on the idea that there's a tremendous amount that can be done. If you're religious, you can do a lot that will be much more in sync with these kids, with their temperament, and with how they are. These children need structure. They live in a world of tohu vavohu. I mean, everything is chaos. It's chaos. They have no time sense. They have no sense of, what's happening from today and tomorrow. They are. It just appeared on my computer screen for a second. And if we can kind of recognize their strengths and then play to their strengths, the fact of a halachic structure around them, it could be great. I mean, it could be great. Unfortunately, we often don't play to their strengths because we get so angry and so frustrated with them that all they see us are these like nagging hags. They don't want that. So
give me an example. Let's take an example. You mentioned before the rabbi giving a drasha in a shul. The sermon is being delivered. Everyone is supposed to sit nice and quietly. The child is jumping up and down in the seat.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, like I say here to people in Israel, when you're in the middle of a terror attack, all you can really do is put your head down and duck. I mean, the real question is, well, what can you do? The first thing the real question is, what can you do to prevent the bad stuff from happening? Or to, when the bad stuff does happen, be ready to deal with it. In such a case, I would just say to all of, whether it's rabbis, teachers, parents, whether you're the rabbi giving the sermon in shul, or the parent at the Shabbos table, or the parent who takes his kid to shul, and the kid is, running, not sitting still and not wanting to look into the sinner. The first, and if I was going to say the most important step, is parents need to, through developing really deep level of mindfulness, parents got to stop getting angry at these kids. It's not their fault. Today, if you would ask a kid to read in front of the class, and you see the child has a problem reading the letters. So today we all know that, oh, look, he's dyslexic. And, it's not that he's stupid or lazy. He really has a neurological problem. When we realize that these children have a neurological temperament, which isn't suited for a lot of the expectations that we have in our society, and we keep on forcing them into that. So the first thing is we become angry, but that anger is so misplaced. It's anger that is sitting on a giant pile of ignorance. And so if we're able to deal with the ignorance and say, the first step is to say, it is not his fault. He is acting based on how his brain is wired. And if your brain is wired that way, you can understand this child really well. If your brain's not wired that way, you're in big trouble. I mean,
But what you're giving now is the advice on how we react.
Yes.
Something you can advise, maybe not the child, but maybe the adult or maybe the parent of the child, of what they can do to help their child.
Yeah. So listen, there's a lot of things that you can do. The first thing you can do is, just as you need to be aware of your own reactions, the parent and the child needs to be aware of their own reactions too. When a child is having trouble, it's easy to say to a kid, sit still. And many kids are able to sit still when you tell them to sit still. But if you happen to have ADHD, sitting still might be exceedingly difficult for you. And for this kind of child, saying sit still, which is really a, if you will, it's a negative commandment. Mitzvat lo taseh. When you say sit still, you're really saying don't move. Okay, what you have to really think whenever you give a demand, an expectation to sit still, for example, well, why might that be hard for him? And then you ask him, is it hard for you to sit still? And he says, yeah, it's hard for me to sit still because the teacher's really boring. And then it's asking, well, what do you do what happens when you get bored? I start feeling my chest pounding. I start getting really angry, for example. If you can teach a child to be mindful, nobody, not even the most ADHD kid that I've ever known, nobody goes from 0 to 100 instantly. There's always a process, whether it's getting a little angry, feeling the blood rushing to your face, feeling your muscles tense, feeling your heart start beating. And the more you become aware of what is happening inside of you, the more you become capable of responding differently. And we have to teach these children to respond differently. Or these adults to respond differently. So if we go back to the child in the middle of shul, in the middle of the rabbi's sermon, bouncing around, so there we might want to ask first of all, that the rabbi might be tempted to scream out and say, Mr. Cohen, can't you control your child? He cannot do that, which would not be effective for anything. Might be much more effective, after, first of all, the rabbi thinking maybe there's a problem here. I have actually several rabbis I know who have read the book. One rabbi said to me recently of a large synagogue in the New York area, said, boy, he wishes he would have read the book 20 years ago because he was thinking of all these kids running around his shul. And we have to, it's just not, it's not equal. It's not equally easy for all people to sit. Some people can sit and not make noise and be, it's okay. And for others, it's hard. So we need to, teach them how to sit better when they have to. And we also have to think of alternative things they can do rather than burning down the school building, when they get angry and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Now, growing up, there were always kids who used to be defined as they didn't have Zetzfleisch. They couldn't sit still. Nowadays, we would probably say that they had ADHD, but it seems to be something much more pervasive today than 40, 50 years ago. Is that true, or it's just that we become so aware of it that we identify it? And I'm wrong.
No, I think what's true is that the expectations to sit still, not move around, not have a lot of external stimuli happening around you, that's become much more. I mean, when we were kids, even, I mean, I guess we are getting pretty old, but like when we were kids, to see someone, you had to really see someone. You had to go, usually get on your bicycle and go over your friend's house. Or, I mean, talking on the phone was okay, but, it's not the same thing. I mean, what we're doing right now in a podcast, this would be unheard of when we were kids, right? I mean, you couldn't actually interact. Today, I see here in Israel during recess time, a lot of times the yards is empty. I mean, it used to be that the ball fields were packed and kids are running like crazy. And now most kids are sitting with their cell phones or tablets and, playing games. And so there's a lot less physical activity, which is one of the reasons we're all getting to be more obese, because we tend to sit around a lot more. And two, yeah, people, I think, are becoming more impulsive. The research seems to indicate that we are more impulsive today than we were 30 years ago, for example, that, everything is instant today. Everything is instant, right?
And so no one, if I'm understanding you correctly, no one has patience. And
We have less patience today. In other words, we're getting, more powerful toys. The world around us is getting smarter, the inanimate world, but we seem to be getting a little bit dumber. You know what I mean? So it's like, yes, in general, we are a society with a lot less patience than we used to have. And when you talk about the kids with ADHD, you're talking about the top, 10% of the society. These people are more impulsive, more hyperactive, and less able to just keep their attention when the environment around them isn't very stimulating than the average kid is.
And where does medication play a role?
Oh, so medication affects the medication that is most commonly given for ADHD is stimulant medication. And this has been since like 1937. There was this pediatrician in the United States called Bradley, who was either a genius or a lunatic or maybe both. And he figured out that he could take these like extremely wild kids. And he said, if I give them amphetamines, they'll be able to control their behavior. Now, I don't know anyone who knows how Bradley was able to say that, but in the reality is that he did what he did, and about 75% of the kids became well behaved. What we know today that when you take a stimulant, which I guess is similar to taking a strong cup of coffee, okay, because caffeine is also like a stimulant, and what it does is it speeds up the activity in the frontal part of your brain, the frontal lobe of the brain. And when the frontal lobe of the brain is functioning more productively, more effectively, people have more ability to have self-control, more self-restraint, and the ability to inhibit their behaviors better. Now, we see that adults with ADHD who had fMRI scans done, right, and we were able to see the actual functioning brain in real life time, we see that in people with ADHD, simply put, the frontal lobe of the brain is sleepy compared to the average person. And hence, it is harder to control and inhibit yourself. It's the way your brain is wired. The medication is a stimulant, which, when it works, and it works in about 75% of the cases, it helps people stop, look, and listen. It helps kids or adults to, yeah.
I dealt with kids for many years, and when they're on the medication, often they say that they don't feel well with it. It kind of puts them in a haze or a blur. Why would that happen?
Yeah, well, first of all, many people who take the medication really don't feel well. They feel like nauseous, or they feel anxious, or they feel depressed. And it's really important. You have to listen. But in most cases, the side effects hang around for a couple of weeks, and then they tend to go away. Now, what I've heard a lot of kids also say the exact same thing. But what I've found out is a lot of kids have a hard time figuring out that being in more self-control is also who they are. I mean, they're used to being that wild and crazy guy who doesn't care about consequences, and so who does everything. And sometimes that feeling of, gee, I'm not myself. Well, you're not the self that you've gotten used to, which is where your brain is not really considering consequences. But you are very, very much, this is you. It can be you. If a person becomes zombied out, like too tranquilized by the drugs, he's probably being overdosed. Okay, but it's a good idea as part of the treatment to use drugs. But if the medication, when they work, about 25% of the kids can't just tolerate them. They really do have very bad physical side effects that are all short term. I have not seen any long-term negative side effects from the use of this stuff. They tend to be fast-acting drugs that go in and out of your body pretty quickly. But what I would say is that unless the world around you is going to become compassionate, sympathetic, and aware. So the medication alone is never enough. It's never enough. I don't see one case where I find, where without compassionate teachers and skilled teachers and parents who are really willing to invest more in this child than just a regular child, that it has a happy ending.
And you've started schools specifically for children with learning challenges,
Yeah.
behavioral and cognitive. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to starting up those kind of schools, especially residential schools?
Yeah, look, I'll tell you like this. In an ideal world, we should be able to accept these type of kids in the general system, and integrate them and do, integrative learning and differential education with these kids. Yeah, that would be great. But I found, and it was more acute in the Torah observant world, that there is a lot of bias. People don't want to admit to it, but there's a lot of bias against these kids. And the more I studied it, it just seemed to me that this is something almost built into our tradition. I mean, I don't have to teach you the Tanakh, but the story of I view the first time that we see ADHD in recorded history is the story of Esav. That when Esau buys the birthright from Yaakov. And we see from the beginning, Yaakov is an Ishtam Yoshev Ohalim. He's right, perfect guy, perfect kid, dweller of tents. And Esau is described as an Ish Tzayid, Ish Sadeh, right? He knows he's a hunter, a man of the fields. And then when he comes to buy the birthright from Yaakov, the Torah describes it in an incredible way. I mean, that you just read it, and I think you should jump out of your skin. It says, Vayochal, when it describes what Esav does, it says, Vayochal, Vayesht, Vayakam, Vayelech, Vayivez, Esav, Eta Bechorah. It says, and he ate, and he drank, and he got up, and he left, and he despised the birthright. What you have there are five verbs, five consecutive verbs, one right after the other. Vayochal, vayesh, vayakam, vayelach, vayivez. Five verbs that are consecutive, one after the other. It's the only place in the entire Tanakh that you have that. There is not any other place. Once, I think, by Eliyahu Hanavi, there's four describing him. He also was a very active type of guy. But Esav, five verbs in a row. So the Torah is telling us something very clear here, that this is an impulsive personality. And I think that, we have come to love Jacob, Yaakov, Yisrael, and we've come to hate Esav. And I would not want your listeners on this podcast to walk away saying, well, I learned I have an Esav at home from this, because, that won't do any good. But thank God we have one other Admoni in the Tanakh, right? The only other Admoni in the entire Tanakh is David HaMelech. That the first time that David appears in the book of Samuel, the book of Shmuel, David appears, and Shmuel, the Navi, the prophet, sees him. And what Shmuel, the prophet, says, Vayar'ehu v'hinei Admoni. He's described as an Admoni, the same term that was used to describe Esav, also as Admoni. And what the Midrash on that pasuk says is that, the Midrash doesn't say this, but it really describes it as he had a panic attack. But the Midrash says, Shmuel Sa'ak ve'amar hu rotzeach hu Esav. He is a murderer. He says, how can he make David HaMelech the king? How can this guy be the king? Don't forget that Yishai only brought him to be seen after he showed him his other 7 sons. He didn't even think he was appropriate. But Esav is also this character. And what we have to learn is to take this temperament and to direct it in a positive way so that it can be used for the service of God, for the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for all of the positive things that we're trying to raise our children to become. But we don't do that enough, and that's what kosher ADHD is about, is trying to teach parents, teachers, how they can raise and develop children to turn, that we shouldn't miss all the Davids that are out there. We got all these David Amelechs out there that I think we're losing so many of them today. And that's
And
what
the
I'm
children
doing.
and the children who are in your schools, the
Yeah.
B'nai Chayil schools, those children, the residential children, are they children with just learning issues, or they're children also who have behavioral issues that cause
They
them?
all have behavioral issues because they all have they have the ADD, and if they're boys schools in particular, so they tend to have the H also. They're pretty hyper and impulsive. Yeah, it's really classes. The classes are shorter. The teachers are trained to offer alternatives. At any time you tell a child that he can't do something, you also have to tell him, okay, this is, you have to give him an alternative behavior that he can do. What can you do? So if you can't sit now, what can you do? I was principal of the school for many years, and kids would often come up to me and say, Dr. Chesner, I'm going nuts. I can't sit now. I'm I have too much happening on the inside. So I said to him, well, okay, so you don't have to go into class. I really don't care if you go into class or not, but what you do have to do something good over the next 45 minutes. And they were like, what do you mean do something good? I said, well, do something good, to help the handyman paint the wall, help the kid in grade lower than you, with work that that he doesn't work, whether it's math or English or whatever it happens to be. Teach one of the younger kids to play basketball. Do something good. I find that when parents start focusing on doing things good with their kids, the kids that's what the kids need, because these kids don't get a lot of compliments. For many, many years, when I would do parent groups, now with kosher ADHD, we do these virtual parent groups. We have parents from all over the world who are sitting together. I used to do the parent groups, locally here in Jerusalem, and we would start them asking parents to say something good about your ADHD child. And it was silent. It took a long time before parents could start, because they were so filled with all of the negative experiences from these kids. And that's what we're really trying to turn around the negative, to fill it in with positive, and to teach people that it can be done in every single home, that no ADHD child should be turned away from a Torah lifestyle. And if parents can learn how to do it, and if teachers can learn how to do it, and I believe they can, we would have, well, we'd have probably like 10 million Jews in America today, as opposed to just the 6 million, because I think all of the ADHD people are, I don't know what they've become, but they're out there, but they're not coming to shul.
And if people want to learn more about kosher ADHD, of course, they can order the book. It's published by Kodesh. It's available
Right.
on Amazon. It's available directly through Kodesh publishers. Uh, do you have other materials online for people who
Yeah, we have a website. It's called kosher-adhd.com. And we have both films that are put up in the blog section of the website. There's films and articles, and people can call us directly for consultations. We work with a lot of parents and with families, and we are always starting new parent groups. And yeah, the kosher ADHD website is probably the easiest way to get more information. But most important thing, I just want to leave parents and educators with the notion. I mean, this is, not just changing lives, it's literally saving lives. I mean, unfortunately, I've been over the past 30 years to a few funerals of kids who end up bad, whether it's overdosing on drugs or just bad. And there's no need, in most cases, we ought not get that far, and we can do something about it.
just one final question, because our time is really almost up. The children who graduate from B'nai Chayil, where do they go afterwards?
Well, but the children who graduate from the schools that we have, and schools like ours, because we really set a trend now, there's about I know about seven within the religious community. It's about 7, 8 different schools that are like it. And I just got actually an email today that within the Haredi community now there's a yeshiva katana for what they call me'ut garei keshev, those who are challenged with attention. So the more ultra orthodox community is also recognizing that. In Israel, they first go into the army, which they love the first part of the army, which is the basic training, because that's paradoxically, it's very structured. They like structure, which is why I think halacha and can be very good for them if we do it in the right way. They like structure when the results are tangible and immediate. They need that. So they go into the army, and then we find that once their self-esteem is they feel better about themselves. We have 2 doctors, and we have many lawyers, and we have a few of our graduates are mayors of cities. I feel bad that people don't let me publicize what they are, but it is possible because these are usually talented people with a lot of energy. And if it can just be channeled in the right way, these people can really do great things. Unfortunately, most kids who go through the regular school system end up feeling like 2 cents by the time they graduate, and they ain't doing good for themselves or nobody around them. So that's what we're trying to do.
So on the positive note of all that can be done, I want to thank you so very, very much for your time today. I look forward to learning even more. And Dr. Chesner, you should continue to be successful, continue to help children learn and children feel good about themselves and overcome challenges. Thank you so
Amen.
much.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.